Welcome back. As Gaza reels from deadly Israeli airstrikes, the siege goes on with no end in sight. Yet Israel's goal of eradicating Hamas appears no closer either. Hamas shot to power in January 2006 in a stunning election win over Fatah. And although billed as the first free and fair elections in the Arab world, the US shunned the victory. Hamas and Fatah came together in a power-sharing agreement and formed a coalition government. But the deal didn't last long. It collapsed amidst bloodshed that left dozens dead. Hamas took over the Gaza Strip in June 2007. Since then, the group has consolidated its control of Gaza. This despite mounting Israeli and international pressure. But the move has left Gaza increasingly isolated, and the territory is now facing a humanitarian crisis. We're still joined by our guests in Ramallah, Mustafa Barghouti, in Tel Aviv, Yuri Avneri, and in Washington, D.C., Clifford May. Mr. May, Israeli leaders said they couldn't fit Jimmy Carter into their busy schedules. Don't you think that's a bit of an immature move on their part?
I think that was the diplomatic explanation. I think the real reason was that since he was going to meet with Carter-Meshaal in Syria, they had no interest in having any discussions with him, and they needn't. If the Israelis want to negotiate with Hamas, that's their decision. Jimmy Carter is a former American president. He holds no position now in the U.S. government. He does not speak for the U.S. government or for the U.S. people. He is freelancing as a diplomat. As an American, I object to that. And the Israelis have no reason to want to give him additional credibility.
But haven't the Israelis, sorry to interrupt you, haven't the Israelis limited their options now? Because what if something good comes out of this meeting with Carter-Meshaal, say for instance on the release of Gilad Shalit, then wouldn't that be embarrassing for the Israelis?
Then let them be embarrassed. If it should happen that Jimmy Carter makes some breakthrough and Carter-Meshaal says we'll give up the prisoners, or we're going to stop the rain of missiles down on Israel that have come from the Gaza Strip ever since Israel ended its occupation of Gaza. There are many ways for Jimmy Carter to communicate that. He can communicate it directly, by email, by phone. He can send somebody. The Israelis may even want to see him at that point. It is not difficult for people to communicate in this age, but I don't think the Israelis are making a mistake by saying we really don't want to see Mr. Carter, who represents no government and no authority, at a time when he is giving credibility to Hamas without Hamas giving up anything at all. Mr. Barghouti talks about the occupation. The occupation of Gaza ended when the Israelis pulled out every settler, every soldier. And in that time, since then, Gaza could have been made to bloom. There could have been factories. There could have been investment in jobs. Instead, Hamas has chosen to pursue a war of annihilation against Israel. You mentioned that the Israelis have recently been in Gaza. That was in response, one should note, to an ambush against Israelis and that killed 3 Israeli soldiers. If Hamas wants to send a message that is changing in some way, it can do so through Carter or through 100 other mechanisms.
Talking about a Hamas message, Yuri Avneri, is Israel and maybe even the US afraid of what Meshaal might tell Carter or offer in terms of peace?
The only thing everybody is afraid of is for Carter-Meshaal to tell Carter that he is ready to talk with Israel, because that would put the Israeli government in a spot. You see, President Carter has one huge advantage. He is an ex-president, which means he is free from all political pressure. He can say what he thinks, he can do what he thinks is right, and we need such a person who does not have to be afraid from any lobby, whether the Israeli lobby nor the Arab lobby, if there is such a thing. He can do what is right, and I think he is doing what is right. I think he's acting in the best real interest of the state of Israel, because we need peace, and peace must be done with the enemy. And in order to achieve peace, you must talk with the enemy. Actually, I met Yasser Arafat in 1982 during the siege of Beirut in rather similar circumstances. Everybody asked me, whom do you represent? You don't represent the state of Israel. But the very fact that an Israeli member of parliament met with the leader of the PLO opened the way for what happened later to the Oslo agreement. I think Carter can do the same today. He can open a little bit the door between the two parties, let in some fresh air, the old tired old cliches, the propaganda slogans which have taken us all hostages. We need new thinking, we need new air. The Gaza Strip cannot be ignored. Hamas is there. There is a war going on. People are being killed all the time on both sides.
It's interesting. I want to bring in Mustafa Barghouti. Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Avneri. Mustafa Barghouti, Yuri Avneri makes an interesting point there. He draws a parallel with Yasser Arafat. Jimmy Carter visited Yasser Arafat's tomb. How significant do you think is this? And do you think that it is a justified parallel historically, where Arafat and the PLO initially were isolated, nobody wanted to meet them, the West branded them as terrorists, but slowly but surely relations were thawed? Do you think that that's an accurate parallel?
It is accurate to a large extent, and nobody can ignore Hamas. And the idea here, if they accept the principles of peace, why not include them? But let me say here that the worst enemy of the Israeli people and the worst enemy of all people in this region, including Palestinians, is, in my opinion, the pro-Israeli lobby in the United States, which Mr. May obviously belongs to. When he says things like Israel left Gaza, Israel never left Gaza. Otherwise, why do we have Israeli tanks sitting in Gaza at this moment? How could he say that Israel left Gaza when Israeli boats
under attack from
prevent,
Gaza ever since, as you surely know,
when
Mr.
Israeli boats, I did not interrupt you. When Israeli boats are preventing fishermen from fishing in the Sea of Gaza, how could he say that Gaza is free when all entrances, all passages to Gaza are blocked completely by the Israeli army? How could he say that Gaza is free when it is just a big prison with 1.5 million people living in less than 240 square miles?
All right, Mr. Barghouti, let's give Clifford May a minute to respond. Let's give him a minute to respond.
Look, ever since the Israelis pulled out of Gaza, there have been missiles raining down on the Israelis. And there have been terrorist attacks from Gaza whenever that has been possible, including the kidnapping and killing of Israeli soldiers on the Israeli side of the Gaza-Israeli border. As long as that goes on, you have to expect some sort of retaliation, some sort of response. At the same time, the Israelis have been sending in food, they've been sending in supplies and fuel. It is a remarkable thing. Never in history have I ever heard of an entity,
and why did
being attacked and sending it to those attacking it.
All right,
fuel and
Mr.
food.
Barghouti, 30 seconds, please. 30 seconds, Mr. Barghouti.
Sir, the place is under siege. There is a huge humanitarian crisis there. 123 people died because they could not get medical treatment. And there are 1,750 who could die at any moment, cancer patients who cannot get treatment, according to World Health Organization. There is a huge, terrible siege on Gaza.
All right, I want to go to Yuri Avneri. Sorry to interrupt you, Yuri Avneri, for a final thought here. Mr. Avneri, I'm sorry, there's less than a minute left on the program. Do you think that there could be a broader peace as a result of this trigger, this initial meeting, and maybe Jimmy Carter also meeting with Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian president, which could trigger a chain of events that could lead to a broader peace?
I think Mr. Carter can trigger a chain of events. First of all, have an impact on Israeli public opinion. We need a ceasefire. We need an exchange of prisoners. We need an end to the blockade. We need real, meaningful peace negotiations. I think Carter can contribute to all this.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for your thoughts. As always, there's so much to say and so little time. Mustafa Barghouti, Yuri Avneri and Clifford May, thank you very much for your thoughts. And thank you so much, the viewer, for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. Bye-bye for now.